Hello all you lovely cosmonauts, as always I am Cosmic, and today we have fallen from grace and are being set with janitorial duty in the Caretaker dungeon Nightshift, which is a puzzle game developed by Blue Box Interactive. The Caretaker places you in the role of a janitor of a fantasy dungeon, and you work for the dungeon master, and your sole purpose is to clean up and reset the dungeon after the heroes have tried to come in and take it over. So your basic duties are to obviously clean up skull, bones and body parts and set them in the furnace. You are to reset the traps and also fill chests full of loot so that lures in various adventurers and heroes. All while doing this, you have to feed the bosses of the dungeon, such as the werewolf or the giant snake, and keep in mind that all of these things will kill you, like the spiders roaming around, so you have to make sure that you don't get killed yourself in the line of duty. So the Caretaker is very much inspired by Viscera Cleanup Detail, which was a game where you played the janitor and you had to clean up after various sci-fi horror things had taken place. Now the great thing about Viscera Cleanup Detail originally, since then it's obviously been developed and includes now co-op and things like that, but the great thing originally about it was the physics behind it. So you had a mop and you had to clean up the bloodstains and pick up body pieces, and there was physics and mechanics entwined with that made it a lot of fun. The Caretaker doesn't have those. The Caretaker is in fact very static, and it's very, very simplistic and ultimately very basic in terms of its core mechanics. In fact, its core mechanics themselves only really have three things to them. Essentially, you reset traps, you fill loot, and you clean up body parts. And that's it. And it's not like you have to get a mop and start, hosing down, various knights' bloodstains on the walls or anything like that. Instead, you have to do things without animation. So you go up to a set of bones and you pick them up and they're gone. And it's just represented by an icon on the screen. There's nothing tangible to hold in that sense, and that for me detracts from the game comparatively to Viscera Cleanup Detail. The only really unique mechanic that the Caretaker offers compared to that of Viscera Cleanup Detail is the fact that there's a noise meter. Now running causing noise, and if you don't feed the creatures and they get very hungry to the point that they get angry, they will start jumping around, screaming and making a lot of noise. Now if that noise meter then fills up, the dungeon keeper, who is asleep somewhere in the dungeon, will wake up and he will come and execute you, and the game will be over. Add to that the fact that all the things like the various traps or the spiders walking around and the different creatures, if you get entangled with them, you will instantly die. It's not like you have a health meter. If you get caught by a spider, you're dead. That's the end of story. And it makes it for a relatively challenging and frustrating game in the sense of, you can get caught off guard pretty easily by a spider crawling across the ceiling. And sometimes it's a little bit frustrating in the sense that you think that you've avoided him by going to the side, and every 9 times out of 10 that will work, but there's always going to be that one time that it doesn't, and then you have to restart the entire level again, which can become really annoying. If I'm being honest, there's not that much to this game. The fact is, its mechanics are very simplistic and there's not a lot of them. It's about going around feeding the creatures, putting loot in chests, cleaning up body parts and resetting traps. And while the dungeons get progressively bigger each level, which means that it's going to take more time to get around, and it's also going to be more dangerous because there's going to be more traps and more enemies around, you're doing the exact same things over and over again, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but the core problem here is that those things, those repetitive tasks that you're doing, aren't fun. There's not enough to them, there's not enough animation to them, and there's no real fun factor involved in that. The thing with Viscera Cleanup Detail was the fact that you got to hold a mop and put it in a bucket of water and smudge the blood around and pick up an arm and a head and an eyeball and that kind of thing. You don't get to do that with the Caretaker, which makes it a very, very static, boring game. Now yes, on the one hand, this is an indie game, and on the other hand, they're only asking for around $7 for this, and for $7 you're going to get maybe a couple of hours worth of gameplay here if you are really good at getting around the dungeon in time and making sure that you don't die a lot. But that being said, just because it is indie doesn't mean that it doesn't have its problems, and comparatively to that of Viscera, it doesn't do enough. With Viscera you have the core mechanic of, making sure that you've got all the body parts, you've got the blood, you've got the mop, and you've got things that make the entire experience satisfying. You don't have that with the Caretaker. You have static assets, static mechanics, and it just makes the entire thing quite laborious and boring, because it's not like you get to do the fun things of smudging around blood and trying to clean up little bits and pieces. It's around running around, picking up things that you can't see in your hands because it's just denoted by an icon, and then running back and clicking. So it's a click fest all the way through, which is somewhat of a disappointment. The addition of physics in this game, especially in this genre, in this kind of clean-up detail genre, is something that is, for me, a necessity rather than a choice. I think you have to have physics, you have to have objects that you can see, that you can pick up, because that's where the core fun factor lies. Overall, the Caretaker Dungeon Nightshift does what it wants to do. It executes it to a relatively okay standard, in the sense that the core mechanics work as intended. There's no horrible bugs in terms of gameplay progressing bugs, or there's no going through walls or anything like that. It works as intended. The problem is that the mechanics are just not fleshed out enough. There's not enough mechanics in there. It doesn't have the allure and the freedom and the physics of something like Viscera Cleanup Detail, and so for me it isn't worth the time investment. It just isn't, because there's very little reward. There's very little actual tenable reward in terms of any kind of progression. There's very little visual reward because everything is so static, and ultimately it causes the game to be a letdown when you compare it to others. And that's a real shame, because this game has a really good theme. It has a great premise. I love the idea of having to clean up a dungeon and having the evil dungeon master below me trying to sleep, and if I make too much noise he's going to come and get me. I love the idea of having to clean up adventurers' dead bodies and reset traps and make sure the treasure chests are sorted, and feeding all the boss monsters and all that kind of thing. It's a great theme and it's a great premise. It just isn't executed to the point of what it could have been, and I think that's the ultimate point that should be taken away from this, is that the theme and the setting and the idea is fantastic, but the execution, the development is just not there. So for me, I have to recommend that you give it a miss, because I just don't think that you're going to get anything from it. There's no experience that can be had here that you come out thinking that was really good, or I really enjoyed that, or I took something away from that. It is just going to annoy you, frustrate you, and completely think about other games in that genre that do things better. And that is my review of the Caretaker Dungeon Nightshift. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. As always, do like, subscribe, and I will see you next time.